All right, well, I've got 4 o'clock. Are we ready to get it going? Okay, fantastic. We'll go ahead and get started. Make good use of everybody's time today. Thanks very much for those that have already jumped on. Hopefully, we'll get some more jumped on. Hey, Drew,
Hello.
how are you, sir? We may have some more jump on as we go throughout. And then, of course, this will probably be recorded and I would imagine be made available to the members later if anybody wants to come back and watch it. We have some fantastic subject matter experts on here today in Chris Hubbard and Dan Madrzykowski as it relates to a couple of the NFPA standards. And I'm involved in some of those as well, but I would not claim near the expertise of either of those two as it relates to the specific standards. So we'll kick it to them for some expertise here shortly. Anyways, welcome to the ISFSI Happy Hour. Obviously, this is a long-running series and oftentimes a popular thing, and it's not supposed to just be us talking the entire time. So as we go, if you've got questions, please just start talking, unmute, and start talking. It definitely is the idea of the happy hour is to be a little bit more conversational. So I don't have slides or anything along those lines. I don't believe Dan or Chris do either. And so I got a little bit of a visual aid I could bring up if we get down into the weeds on the NFPA process, but generally we'll just talk through some stuff and see where the conversation goes from there. Anyways, with that being said, we're going to talk about NFPA 1400 and NFPA 1700 today. And really there's two aspects to talk about, at least from my perspective, with both of these. And that is the perspective of the standards development process itself and where we're at with these documents in the fire service kind of on a 30,000 foot view, the development of the standards and where they are in the process and kind of what they're all about and what it contains. And then also the ISFSI side. And the ISFSI side is the deliverable side. So there is an ISFSI course that is specific to NFPA 1700 and an ISFSI course that is specific to 1400. Both of those, I believe, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but were developed related to an FP&S grant as far as originally were developed and then rolled out as grant-funded programs. So we'll talk a little bit about those two classes as we go as well. So with that being said, we'll just pick one first and kind of dive into that, and then we can kind of get to the other. So I'll start with NFPA 1700. And Dan is really it's delightful to have him here because he's for lack of a better term, one of the godfathers here as it relates to NFPA 1700 and seeing it from its infancy on up through to where we are now. And this document dates back, the original development of it, I believe, goes back to a request from Smokey Dyer to the NFPA back in, what was it, probably 14, 15, something like that. I'm not quite sure what the timeline was. But Dan, can you give us a little bit of an overview as to the development of NFPA 1700 and what it's all about? And obviously, it's the guide to structural firefighting. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the NFPA semantics, but that kind of matters with this document and others as far as guides and standards and recommended practices and things like that. So can you walk us through the development of 1700 over the past several years and kind of where we are now?
Sure. So 1700 is a guide, and the reason it's a guide is so that it can be educational. If it was turned into a standard, it would just have language that you shall, you must, all these kind of things. And really what we were trying to do with the guide and what Smokey intended was to provide a baseline of information for the entire fire service. There were, over the past 20 to 15 years, there's been amazing amount of research done by NIST, by UL, by others, different universities and whatnot, mostly as a result of the DHS FEMA grants that support research for firefighting and firefighters. And this goes not only to firefighting tactics, but fire dynamics, as well as fire exposures related to cancer, decontamination, all these topics. So people are learning this information, going to conferences. going to FDIC, going to other places, and they hear somebody say something. Lesser number of people are reading the peer-reviewed journal articles in the science journals to get this information. So Smokey Dyer saw a situation that kind of mimicked the situation that fire investigators had getting close to, I don't know, 30 years ago now, 40 years ago, where there was new science, there was new evidence that some of the practices might have been based on this is the way we've always done it, as opposed to based on this is the best way to do something. And so 921 came out to try to make the record straight for everybody. Here's baseline information so we could raise the bar and everybody will have the same information. It won't depend on whether or not you went to the meeting last week or not and heard what somebody said. We're going to codify it. We're going to document it. And so he saw a similar kind of situation happening with the fire service, where some people were saying, hey, I heard this talk and we're going to do this in our department. And the department next door didn't hear the talk and they weren't going to do that because that's not how they've done it. And, we're not getting the benefit of the research, so to speak. So NFPA was under development for about 5 or 6 years. It came out with the first edition in 2021. And now we're working on the second edition. And so where we're at in that time frame is that the first public draft is posted on NFPA's website. And so if you look for NFPA 1700 and you get to click on next edition, and it will show you the proposed changes that the technical committee have made to that. And I will say that the participation is beyond the technical committee. So there are task groups that have been set up for each of the chapters, and people above and beyond members of the technical committee have been participating to get their views, let the technical committee know what things they're concerned about or what they would like to see added to the guide. And the deadline for having your comments in for the committee to consider for the second draft is January 3rd, 2025. So again, it's open to everybody to make comments, to give you an idea of some of the things that are changing or being proposed to change. So chapter 4 was basically a background of the research that was done and is used as evidence to support tactical considerations within the guide. And of course, the tactical considerations are never just solely based on research. They're also based on the experience of the firefighters and the fire chiefs that are participating as part of this project and as part of the UL FSRI projects. For each research program we do, we typically have a technical panel made up of firefighters and fire chiefs from across North America. Sometimes we have some folks from Europe to provide input to make sure that the research is done, that the results are going to be beneficial and useful to the fire service. So there's a couple periods of checks and balances from the fire service that can go into this. And of course, adding public comments or the public commenting on what the technical committee proposes is a big one of those. That's your opportunity to vote, if you will. So chapter 4 has been updated to include research basically done from about 2015 to early 2023 to account for how that's going to influence the other chapters where we're getting that information from. So I guess I'll skip ahead to big news. The big news is there's going to be a new chapter added with regard to search and rescue. So in the first edition of 1700, search and rescue was not accounted for because we didn't have the research to support it. So now we have the research, we have guidance, again, experience from a number of the members on 1700, as well as folks on our tech panel. And that has evolved into, what are some optimizing ways that you can affect a search and then a rescue? So for example, if it's hot, smoky condition and you're in your turnout gear, think twice about what you're going to do if you find a victim, right? Is it best to take them out the same way you came in? Did you have to pass a fire room on your way in? Is it best to put them over your shoulder and pull them out, or is it best to keep them low in the space? Is it better off to get them in a room and isolate them until fire can be knocked down before you remove them? So a lot of different considerations are presented for people to look at. Chapter 7, which is building construction and structural considerations. There's a lot of new information there about battery energy storage systems and some placeholders for battery energy storage systems that you might find in residences as they're becoming more popular, coupled with people putting solar panels on their home. Also, what you might not consider a battery energy storage system, but effectively, if somebody's got an EV parked in the garage, that's got a tremendous amount of energy that's stored in it. And if that is part of the challenge, whether it ignited initially or it might be the target, what do you need to consider about that? How should you protect yourself? We've done some experiments demonstrating how batteries in garages can become explosive and throw the garage door 50 feet. The garage door serves as a pretty good vent panel, if you will. Good news, bad news. We're also getting real world incidents that mimic that. In April of 2023, there was an incident in Colorado where the garage door blew off. There was a hybrid Jeep inside the garage that was in the process of thermal runaway with its battery pack, and firefighters entered the garage through the door and down into a kitchen door. There was a little miscommunication about where the fire was and what was going on. And there happened to be a firefighter standing outside. And fortunately for him, he had pretty quick reflexes because the garage door blew off and took his helmet off, but missed his head, thankfully. So again, the research and reality are coming together with that experience and the research. So we're getting some placeholders in Chapter 7 to try to address some of those. Today, our folks were burning more cars in our lab in Northbrook, Illinois, both EVs and internal combustion engine cars, with the effort to collect what is the hazard from them, as well as what's the best way to suppress them and control them. Our initial shot at that is basically going to be using hose streams and no implements specifically designed for EVs or anything, because they're just not widely available. And quite frankly, it would appear that most of them are ineffective or maybe even more dangerous than using the hose stream. So to begin with, we're going to use the tools that all firefighters have and see what we can do with those. Chapter 8, which addresses PPE, there's been some minor changes there. Again, additions to material as we've done some research on SCBA face pieces, comparing the 2007 compliant ones from NFPA 1981 with the 2013 compliant face pieces, which are thicker and should take more heat before they would bubble or have a hole open up. And so there's some information about that there. Chapter 9, which is strategic considerations, that task group is, I would say, I would call that a full revision, in that when you look at it online, you'll see that almost every section has changes or additional information added with regard to size up, what you should be looking for. They were trying to streamline some of the things you should be looking for your initial windshield report, if you will. And then trying to, again, streamline what you're looking for on your 360. So there's a lot of good information there. Again, that task group was very busy. For exterior fire control, Chapter 10 is the air and water. And for exterior fire control in Chapter 10, there's a move to delete the term transitional attack and just leave it as exterior fire control, trying to use plain English as to what that tactic is. that tactic could be used in offensive strategy. That tactic could be used in a defensive strategy. That tactic could be used in many ways. And the term transitional attack had not been well defined. And as a result, it has a wide range of meetings in departments across North America. Some of them are very favorable, and some people assume that when you're talking about a transitional attack, that you have to transition your strategy, that you're going from offensive to defensive, and that's the only time that you would use a transitional attack. So in order to try to clarify that, we just want to use the bare bones. What are we talking about? We're talking about water from the exterior. And so we're trying to take away that other verbiage that has a wide variety of meanings. Chapter 11 has to do with PPE cleaning and exposures. And again, there's some minor updates to that as there's been some additional information gained in the past 3 years since the last edition came out. Chapter 12, I don't think anything's being eliminated. That's the chapter on specific tactical considerations. So, a warehouse or a multifamily dwelling unit, they're different types of occupancies have specific tactical considerations in that chapter. And there's a lot of information being added there. If there's some specifics for size up or specifics for cues as to, when you might want to change from offensive to defensive, or some lookouts or watchouts for different type of structures. And that is long-winded perhaps, but that gives you a rundown of the various chapters that are being modified and changed. Anybody have any questions or thoughts on any of that stuff?
So I think that's perfect, Dan, and thank you for that rundown. I think there's some extremely exciting stuff going in there, particularly all of that new information from FSRI about search and rescue. I mean, I think that's a huge one. I think that'll generate a lot of interest getting that into the document, and that's definitely exciting stuff. One of the things that I want to talk, since we're talking NFPA, and Dan and Chris both, and anybody, feel free to chime in on this, but I think one of the most important things that the fire service needs to know, and Dan alluded to this several times, is we can be involved in this process, and that is well beyond just the technical committee, right? Yeah, there certainly is work going on with certain subgroups and people pitching into the development of some of this information, but on a formal basis, it's not just the technical committee that's chiming in on this, and the whole fire service has the ability through the process of public input ahead of the first draft, and then ahead of the second draft, the concept of public comment. And what I'd like to do, I am going to try to briefly share my screen here just as a little bit of a visual. We'll see if this works or not. Can you all see my screen, or is it teeny tiny?
I can see it.
Okay.
I see the Word document.
Okay, that's fine. On my screen, it's like really small, but is it big enough you can actually see it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good. So anyways, just to kind of walk you through, and actually with NFPA 1400 and with NFPA 1700, we're kind of in the same spot on this. So I just wanted to put up this little visual. I didn't come up with this. This is directly from NFPA, but just to give you an idea as to where all you can have a say in this, right? So as Dan mentioned, back in January of this year, the first draft meeting was held and looked over public inputs, looked over other things that the technical committee members wanted to bring forth, and then that leads to a first draft. That gets voted on by the technical committee, and the report for that gets posted. And then once that's out there, which is where we are now, we're in step 2, that kind of first curve that you see at the top of that standards development process, which is public comment. And so essentially, anybody in the fire service can go in, see what the process is here, look at that document, read what is being discussed, look at the strike-throughs, look at what's being proposed, and so on, and just simply comment on that. They prompt you to create an account, I believe, or something like that on NFPA. I'm sure there's some type of a sign-in process to be able to put that comment in. But essentially, you can see where this is at, and you can make your voice heard in this process. And then after that public comment period closes, I think the second draft meeting for this is an in-person meeting, Dan. I think it's next March or something like that, I believe.
Somewhere in that time frame, yeah.
Yeah, and all of those public comments will then be reviewed, comment by comment by comment, and the committee will talk about each one. And so it very much is an active process. And the reason that I like to bring that up in this setting with ISFSI is the Instructor Society is all a bunch of hard-charging, really engaged, super passionate folks. It's a bunch of people that are exactly the type of folks that we would want to be reviewing this information and chiming in your thoughts on public comment. ISFSI is a strong organization of a lot of really smart people. So if you want to be involved in the NFPA process, number one, you might be able to get involved in a technical committee. But short of that, be involved in putting in public input and putting in public comment in the stage that we're in right now. As you follow that along, there's one final way beyond public comment to get involved in kind of have your voice heard in that process, which is a little bit more rare, but it's something called a NITMAM, a Notice of Intent to Make a Motion at the NFPA technical meeting. So there's actually 3 parts in the process in which you can, kind of have your voice heard. And so I just want to encourage everybody to do that. That's all. So I'll stop sharing this screen. I just kind of wanted you to see where we're at along the way and encourage you to get involved. Any thoughts on that from anybody on the call today? Yeah, Dave, you just raised your hand. Go for
it. Yeah. How? I've always wanted to get involved with the NFPA on technical committee or public comment, but it seems like I have most of my stuff either drop my email or it'll be something dropped in fire engineering or whatever, and I just don't see a lot of notifications with NFPA.
Okay, so I got the easiest thing for you. I tell people this all the time. If you got a web browser up?
Yeah, I do.
So just go to nfpa.org/whatever the number is that you want. nfpa.org/1700. nfpa.org/1400, whatever. That is a hyperlink directly to whatever standard you want. And then if you go on there, just as Dan said a little bit ago, and go to next edition, Dan just dropped one in a link in the chat there. And you go to next edition, and then it should give you, let's see, I just had
submit. That's very straightforward. I'm in it already.
Okay, perfect. And then it literally, there's a little box there that says submit a public comment online. You see it?
Yep, I sure do.
Okay, so that's the big takeaway is please get involved on these and make your voice heard on all this stuff. And it's really easy. And that's, again, the joke sometimes with NFPA is ha ha ha, no NFPA's, no free publications available, or NFPA's, no firefighters paying attention. There's all kinds of funny little joke acronyms as it relates to NFPA. But the reality is, particularly the free one, I always kind of correct people if I hear somebody make that joke, because that's not true. You can go, if you create an account on NFPA, you can view and read every single NFPA standard. It is a fallacy in the fire service that you have to pay to read all of these NFPA standards. Now, that doesn't mean that you can print it. It doesn't mean that you can save it as a PDF, but anyone can view and read any NFPA standard at any time, period. It just simply requires creating a login to the NFPA site. So that's something that I always try to kind of cheerlead a little bit as far as getting people familiar with these documents and then getting them involved in the documents as well. So hopefully, Dave, we'll see some public comment on you in 1700. Good stuff. All right, well, there we go. I feel like that was a small win already. So, we can just stop now. No, just kidding. So one more thing on 1700, and then I want to pivot to 1400 and kick it over to Chief Hubbard for a little bit, is on 1700. So as I said, NFPA is NFPA standards development is its own thing, right? But then the ISFSI also has a class that is based on the NFPA 1700 document that was originally developed. There was an online module developed related to that. And then there was a 2-day in-person hands-on class that was developed related to that as well. I had the opportunity to teach it a couple of times myself in some different areas of the country. And so I believe on the website right now, Suzanne, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that one's currently under some revision and is not actively available. Maybe NFPA 1700, but might make a resurgence down the line. I don't know what the status within ISFSI is as it relates to the NFPA 1700 hands-on program.
Well, I believe the 1700 program was a grant program, and the grant part is over. And
Yes.
so I believe they're looking at what to do with it next. I don't know exactly where we are with that. But I do have a question. I don't know if you saw it. We were asked if you can log into, and I'm assuming NFPA for comments from South Africa, that they can log in from anywhere.
I would assume so. I don't know that for sure, but I would assume so.
Okay.
And Brad, I just put the link to the online portion of the 1700 class that we developed with you guys.
Perfect.
That again, that's available free 24/7, even from South Africa.
Yeah. And on that note, Dan, can you give a quick plug to the entire Fire Safety Academy online and the library there?
Certainly. So our Fire Safety Academy, I believe we have about 38 different programs available. Again, they're all available free, no charge. Most of them are now tested, so you can get a certificate with it as well. There are some super users with different fire departments that have made the connection where they, have their whole fire department taking classes and things like that. So it ranges from training programs that are just focused on, let's say, vertical ventilation or horizontal ventilation or interior fire suppression or fire attack. But then as we learned, the classes grew as well to get into like coordinated attack, to bring what good looks like, bring all the pieces together. 1700 is another example where there's little bits of everything that's been done, basically going through all the chapters of 1700 to provide information on that, and also with background resources if you want to dig deeper are available from that. There's been a trend to make the classes into mini lessons so that you could take sort of a 5-minute chunk of it, or if you wanted to assign a 5-minute chunk of a given class to a group of students that you're working with or your crew, they could just do that piece. So it's trying to make it more accessible. And just to get ahead, there's also a course now on 1403, in the sense that there are certain prerequisites with regard to understanding fire dynamics and understanding the limitations of your turnout gear and things like that, and decon, that are part of the requirements for students that want to take live fire training. And so now we have that course online as well. And while Chris is talking, I'll get a link to that up and posted. But again, we've had pretty good response. We have a lot of users. We're trying to keep the classes updated, not only for look, but also as we learn more information about a topic like structural collapse or something like that, we're trying to update it. There's a neat feature, and I don't know if anybody online was lucky enough to get in on this, but working with the North American Fire Training Directors, we now have a program where it's basically an instructor development program. And it was intended to be a pilot and reach 50 instructors. And instead, we have 300 instructors in the pilot from across the United States. I guess there's some Canadians as well. So across North America. It's going to be an 18-month program. Basically, they get some classes that they have to take, some coursework that they have to take. There's some introduction to each one and helping them understand what's important in terms of teaching and how to teach it. There's a element of how to teach it, not only what's important to teach. And then every quarter or so, there's a live webinar with whoever the subject matter expert is on that particular set of classes that they took. And there's a question and answer session or a presentation if there's an area that we felt that the class was a little weak or old in and we needed to update. So far, out of 300 that started, I believe there were about 240. You have to finish the classes and able to be on the webinar. I believe there were 240 that were able to sit in the first webinar. We had over 200 and some live, and then other people watched the recording. So far so good. I've met a number of students. One guy from Oklahoma I was just with at the U.S. Fire Academy last week, and he was just thrilled that he's having the opportunity to do that. Brad, are you aware of anybody in the ISFSI that got logged in or tied into that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not, but there very well may be.
I mean, that was something that was, came through state training directors, and they were promoting their staff members to do that. So that's what it's kind of targeted at.
Very cool. I am going to reshare my screen here very, very briefly, just because I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, I think Dan's going to put this link in the chat as well. But if you're not familiar with the Fire Safety Academy, each one of these is a really, really well done, dynamic, interactive module. Some of these were partnerships with ISFSI. Some were just purely ULFSRI projects. But fantastic content and a lot of it on that Fire Safety Academy website. And I'm going to click one other tab over here back to the ISFSI website. And I just want to make sure that everybody on here is likely ISFSI members, and want to make sure that you're aware of the different things that are available on the website. And I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but if you look across the tabs on the top, if you click down on continuing education, there's a lot of great resources in there. I happen to have the NFPA 1700 class up now that it talks about currently being updated. A new release will be available in 2025, just as Suzanne mentioned. That was formerly a grant funded class, and it's maybe going to be whatever updated, repackaged, maybe made available to departments as a deliverable. Hopefully, I don't know what the plans are on that class at the moment. But then even on credentialing programs, if you click on that drop down, one of the most popular programs in ISFSI is the live fire instructor credential for fixed facilities. Very, very popular program. Chris Hubbard is one of the lead instructors, probably original developer or something on that program. He's been at it for a long time, and that's a popular one as well. So I just want to make sure that y'all were aware of that stuff. So I will stop sharing again. And I want to pivot, unless there are any outstanding questions related to 1700, I want to pivot a little bit to 1400. So I'll pause for 1 second. Any final questions on 1700? All right, so we'll talk NFPA 1400. It actually, interestingly enough, is in a very similar cycle as far as time frame goes. There was a first draft meeting earlier this year, and it is currently open for public comment. So again, just like I mentioned earlier, talking with Dave, nfpa.org/1400, and that takes you to the current status of that document. If you go to next edition, submit public comment, and so on. But 1400 is a new thing, and it kind of speaks to the consolidation process that NFPA has going on right now. So Chris, can you talk a little bit about that NFPA consolidation process and what all NFPA 1400 series documents are now going to live in 1400, and kind of what that looks like and where it's at?
I'd be glad to. First, thanks for having me on. It's an honor. It's been great to be involved with the society for so many years, and it was my involvement with ISFSI that kind of got me roped into the NFPA thing. Eddie Buchanan drug me down that hallway, which has been great, and I've been involved with the Fire Services Training Committee since 2012, which Dan is also a part of. So it's been together. We've had a great time with looking and helping with all the fire services training and watching that develop throughout NFPA over the years. So just as you mentioned, Brad, the 1400 is part of the consolidation project. This is something that started back in like pre-COVID, like 2019 for NFPA. They took all of the standards and broke them into basically 5 different groups. And this 1400 just happened to be in group 5, so the last one. And you'll see that go to print in 2026. So we are kind of the caboose in this train, if you will, of all of these changes. There are 10 documents that our technical committee helps design and draft, and 7 of them make up what will become 1400. So it's going to take us a really long time to get out of the very familiar terminology such as 1403. That term will be absent, and that content will reside in like chapters 16 through 20. So that's where that information will be. And if you want to buy the standard, then you'll have to get the entire 1400 standard, which will be good because it will blend everything together in one document. For example, in the past, if you wanted to see what was the requirement for the facilities, then that was 1402. You would purchase that document. And then, of course, 1403 if you wanted to be compliant with kind of live fire training. So obviously that's going to be one-stop shop now and be in one spot. So it's got 1402. It's obviously live fire. 1403. 1404 is the respiratory protection training. 1407 is rapid intervention crews. 1408 is thermal imaging. 1410 is the evolutions as we know it. And 1451 is the standard on driving. So those 7 documents are embedded into 1400. So together, that's going to make up 52 chapters and like 14 annexes. So you remember those backpacks you used to have like back in the 8th grade that were really big? You're probably going to need one of those to carry this document around. Documents that our committee is responsible for but not included in 1400 would be 1401, which is on reports and records, 1405 marine vessel fires, and 13E kind of operations in buildings that have sprinklers and standpipes. Those are going to be standalone documents. And just as you indicated, it's open for comment until January 3rd. To give you guys an idea and the folks on the call, we might have anywhere from 50 to 100 public inputs that come in. Each input is evaluated by the entire committee. We are provided with those inputs in advance prior to meeting in person or virtually. So we all have an opportunity to review them. And each one is voted on by the entire body. So a thorough review of each comment is taken into consideration, and I can't overemphasize enough the importance of getting involved. And you quickly reviewed how simple that is. It's a lot of good content that has come in across the country that's been extremely helpful for to the development of these documents over time. So there's going to be a great deal of content. Again, that ends on January 3rd. I think we're going to get together back February, March, same time frame as 1700. And there'll be another final draft, second draft that's issued out for everyone to review. And we should see this thing go to print in 2026. So it's a long time coming for a lot of the standards that are being consolidated. I don't look for any significant change to come, anything that's kind of earth-shattering, if you will. Obviously, the intent of this is to simply consolidate those 7 documents into one. One of the things that you might see is a little bit of terminology change. Each of those 7 documents had their own definitions chapter. And if you could imagine like 7 documents, each having their own definitions chapter, and they all being cut and pasted into the same document. We spent, I think, maybe 4 to 8 hours one day in Florida last year, simply going through and trying to navigate all of the definitions and to try to align them with the remaining NFPA definitions and to make sure that they were all consistent. So that's where we are with that particular document. Like I said, 52 chapters. I don't look for there to be a lot of earth-shattering change unless there's something that comes in on public input. One thing that you might see, like in 1403, from a terminology standpoint, we talked about changing the term fire control team, which we know as being the ignition officer and one other person, and changing that to like an ignition group. And the person that oversees that might be the ignition group supervisor. So kind of some terminology that's kind of just gone in line with where the fire service has gone. I'll we'll pre-warn Dan about OSB. Maybe he'll want to touch on that because everywhere we go, it seems like OSB is always a conversation of topic, and him and his group have done countless hours of research on that will help provide us some direction in the future. All of the content that we recall, like in 1403, that had to do with inspections, all that's going to go to what we did know as 1402, which would just be the chapter really before all the 1403 content, probably like chapter 14 or 15 or something like that. So really kind of some terminologies. There's going to be a lot of supplemental information that will be available in annexes, which is great. Some sample burn sequence kind of matrix charts that the standard has always required, but never really had a good sample to look at. We're going to have one of those that will be available in the annex. I think Dan and his group is going to put together some heat release rate information to try to help that be a little bit more visible for the users and for the participants. Dan mentioned task groups that were part of 1700, and 1400 is also managed by a long list of task groups. So each of those, what we would know is kind of the former standards, each have a task group of a series of kind of subcommittees of our technical group, and those folks all work together to try to help manage that document. A lot of that work is done prior to us meeting in person, so that stuff can be streamlined. Again, all originating from public input, so a great opportunity for folks to chime in there. 1401, again, not part of 1400, but one plug that I want to throw out there from kind of a safety and health and safety standpoint was documentation of exposures. That's something that you'll see in the next version of 1401, where if you do live fire training, it will be part of the standard as part of a shall, if you will, to document that exposure, which is great. A lot of the fire service is shifting to documenting and focusing on documenting live fire training. I know we are as part of the society when we teach our 3-day credentialing class, but there's going to be a strong emphasis on that. So I think that'll help out a great deal. And then one final thought that I wanted to highlight, Brad, you reviewed the next edition tab and how to get involved from a public input standpoint. And if anybody still has their web browser pulled up, next to that tab that said next edition is the link that says technical committee. And if you scroll down, you should be able to view who the committee members are. And to the side of that, you should see a link that says apply to the committee. And you should see that for any of the NFPA standards. So again, an additional way to get involved.
Yeah,
that's kind of a brief overview.
No, I appreciate it. That's great stuff. And just to make a little bit of a joke, but maybe it'll make sense as it relates to the public input and public comment. I oftentimes tell people to try to encourage them. Hey, look, no, I promise this will get looked at. I promise your voice matters. I said that everything that gets submitted, I said somebody could submit a public comment that says Brad French is an idiot, and it will get voted on at a meeting.
True statement.
To see if that, I don't know if I want to know how that vote would work out, but that's if you put it in, it's going to get discussed at the meeting and reviewed. So your voice really does matter in that regard for sure. On 1400, so first of all, I wanted to ask one clarifying question on 1400, Chris. Is the annex, the explanatory material annex, going to follow each chapter, or is it going to all be a bunch of annexes at the end? Because you oftentimes you follow back and forth between the body of the document, and you find that little asterisk, and then you kick over to the annex material. Is that going to be all the way at the end for everything, or that's kind of down in the weeds? But
no, that's a really good question. Obviously, 1403 is kind of where most people live, or it's kind of one of the most passionate ones, and that's a simple document. And if you want to look at annex material, it's like 3 pages over and you're there.
Right.
This is the draft is showing that all of these will be in the rear of the document, which is going to be more like before you. Yeah,
you're going to have to really get back there to do it. And just for context, for maybe some that aren't quite as familiar with the NFPA process, things can become a guide. Things that are a guide can then become a standard. And the reason that I know that is my involvement with 1402. 1402 was originally called the Guide to Building Fire Service Training Centers, and then transitioned to a standard. I believe it's called Standard for Fire Facilities and Associated Props is what the document name is. Well, of course, now it'll be part of 1400. But when that occurred, we went as a technical committee, went through the process of figuring out with a guide, it's non-mandatory language, right? With a guide, it is shoulds or may considers and things like that, as opposed to mandatory language of shalls and musts, right? And so when it transitioned from a guide to a standard, we had to go through and piece out peel out the layers that truly made sense to be mandatory language. And then in the case of 1402, there was a ton of good information in that document. It was a little dated, but there was a ton of good information, and it just all rolled into explanatory material, because in the NFPA world, there is very much a difference between what's in the body of the document and what is the explanatory material in the annex. That literally is, if it's in the explanatory material in the annex, it's technically not, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but technically not part of the document if it's in the explanatory material at the end. And so 1402 went through the process at that time of having this really big, robust document that went to this much is actually in the standard body, the body of the standard, and then this much rolled back to kind of helpful information in the annex at the end. So anyways, that's getting down into the weeds a little bit, but I think maybe an important point to make as far as the annex and the explanatory material goes.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'll just say great point. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to mention about 1400, and then we'll use our remaining time to kind of open it back up to the group a little bit with whatever else we want to talk about towards the end here, but is the 1400 ISFSI class. So again, through a grant, ISFSI was able to develop a deliverable for NFPA 1400. It's called Roadmap for the Modern Fire Service Instructor. If you've been following along with your Academy newsletters, which hopefully that's maybe where you saw this happy hour as well. But hopefully you're reading those newsletters when they come out. Here we go. Some thumbs up from Emily. I'm sure she spends a lot of time and effort on those. But it's been mentioned on multiple Academy newsletters that this NFPA 1400 grant deliverable is going to be coming out. My understanding is that it's a 2-day course, and that the first day is kind of teaching, kind of train the trainer type stuff, and then the second day is more teach backs of some of these different skills. I believe is the current layout of that. It might still be under some finalizing as far as development goes. They did do an initial train the trainer already, and there's going to be 25 of these. My gut would tell me that they're working through North American Fire Training Directors maybe to establish sites and things like that. At least that's how it's occurred in the past. So anyways, I don't want to spill the beans because I don't have any beans to spill. I'm sure Suzanne and Emily know much more about it than I do. But can either of you speak as to where we're at with that process with the 1400 course and when that's going to start to roll out and locations start to be announced? Is there any late breaking details on that? Radio silence from the ISFSI staff.
I don't believe so, but it is under my impression that it will be launched and announced during the fall time, so about this time of year. So I'm thinking November, December.
Okay. So you're going to leave us hanging. All right, I get it. So keep an eye. No, that's totally fine. Keep an eye on your email inbox for those 25 grant-funded deliverables of NFPA 1400, that Roadmap for the Modern Fire Service Instructor course. Going to be a lot of really good stuff. And of course, when it's grant-funded, the benefit there obviously is that you can have the opportunity to go to that class free of charge. So go ahead, Chris. You want to? You just popped something in there. Do you want to speak to whatever that was? 1585?
I was just throwing a quick plug in when we were talking about documentation of exposures. When we were in Orlando last cycle, they were talking about the development of 1585, which is brand new standard. So I just threw the link in the chat really quick. It's a great thing if you want to take something back to your fire department to go, hey man, this is hot off the press. This is one of them. It just came out in May. In fact, its current edition is listed as 2025, but it's talking about proper decon procedures and different contamination controls for people, equipment, apparatus, both structural firefighting that we experience out in the field, in addition to training. So it's really great stuff, and like you said, hot off the press. So something to be aware of for those of you all who have link access, and it would be something great to take back to your department.
Very good. So I'll open it up to the group. We got about 10 minutes left before we get kicked off of here. So what burning questions are on your mind? Not too often that you've got Dan Madrzykowski and Chris Hubbard on here that can answer a lot of high-level questions. So yeah, Dave, go ahead.
There we go. One question is a fairly fundamental one, and it's going back to participating. And I started walking through applying to a technical committee. When you meet for committee meetings, is virtual allowed? I'm addressing one of the several questions that they have in the application.
Yes, my experience has been there was a time period when it was virtual. That was it, right? During around COVID and things like that. But my experience has been that it's often a mixture. There's usually in-person meetings with a hybrid or virtual option. I believe that's the way that they're rolling out the 1700 meeting and coming up. So yes, I do think that virtual is an option.
Okay. And my next question is, it's a very specific one in terms of an NFPA 1700 interpretation, and something that I'm kind of struggling with now. So my current contract, I've picked up a contract with a fire department that is kind of remote. We have to send our gear away for decon, and any minor repair, decon and shipping is shaking out to be roughly 20 to 22% of the cost of a new set of gear. Wow. Just for decon. At what point, and we've got an extractor and we're on the verge of getting our own extractor, is there any guidance language in the standard that specifically directs you towards, okay, this can be cleaned just with an extractor, this actually has to go to an industrial site, a third party?
First of all, just out of curiosity, Dave, where are you at?
It's called Middle of Nowhere, Ontario.
Okay.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
It's called Fort Francis, Ontario. I'm right across from International Falls, Minnesota.
Okay.
So I'm like my dad always says, reminds all of his American friends that your northernmost cities are still further south than our southernmost cities. So I'm buckling up for a heck of a winter.
Oh, I got you. So I'm not sure if that's where that question would live. To me, that almost sounds more of like an 1851 question.
Yeah.
I nodding along, so maybe that's right.
Okay.
I would agree. So
again, the old trick, nfpa.org/1851, and you can have it at your fingertips there. Do you have some folks, because 1851 gets down into, repairs that you can do there locally versus, more higher level repairs. I forget what the tiered terminology is in 1851.
Yeah, it's not. I did look at 1851, and for some reason I thought it might land somewhere in the 1700 series, somewhere hidden, which is why I asked. I just looked at 1851 today. It's a little vague. It just says somebody that's trained can actually do the annual inspection, for example. Well, what does the training entail, and that sort of thing. But I'll take a deeper dive into 1851.
Okay. Hey, Dave, I'm gonna put my email address in the chat and hook up with me, and I'll get you situated.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Amen.
Yeah, so in 1700, it just talks about that PPE should be laundered in an industrial extractor after being exposed to smoke and contaminants. And then also talks about, the care the member should have in terms of showers and things like that. So it gives guidance on the gross decon that needs to be done, but there's no shall language about whether it needs to be, how it gets done, or whether it needs to be sent off site.
Gotcha.
All right, excellent. Anybody else? All right. Well, any final parting words from Dan and Chris, our subject matter experts on here today? I certainly appreciate their time and commitment to the mission here. Any final thoughts?
I guess something unrelated. Just a watch out. Be aware of things that explode. With lithium-ion batteries, we're seeing firefighters getting surprised by things that explode. LA City had firefighters get hurt with the compressed natural gas tank explosion. We had a fire chief killed in Georgia when a refrigerator truck full of frozen chickens exploded. There's a firefighter killed a few months ago in LA County by a tire explosion. So, I mean, keep in mind that all these things act as pressure vessels, whether it's a tire or a tightly enclosed truck, tractor trailer truck, and be mindful of that, the fire dynamics that we talk about in structures a lot, that when the temperature goes up, the pressure goes up, right? So if you've got one of these tires or trailers or any kind of vessel that's sealed, that's being exposed to heat, that the pressure is going up there. And for the lithium ion battery, it's sort of the same thing, except our pressure vessels in that case are little battery cells, and then they're glued together, strapped together, tied together, put in a steel box. It could be a relatively small steel box, or it could be a commercial battery energy storage system. They had one of those in California about a month ago tip over. Was loaded poorly on the truck. The truck took a turn, it tipped over, and while the tow company was flying their drone around it to explore it, it exploded, and they left it on the bridge to burn for 36 hours. So just something in general to let your crews know, use the reach of the stream. If you're trying to cool something, even if something looks kind of inert, if you think it's got batteries inside or it's a vessel being heated somewhere, that the fire itself may not be the hazard, but the explosion might be the hazard. So, keep your head on a swivel type of thing.
Outstanding. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I certainly appreciate everybody's time today. I think this has been productive. I think we got through some good updates on 1400 and 1700, and hopefully laid out that process for involvement in the NFPA standards development process a little bit more for everybody. So appreciate your time and the energy of Suzanne and Emily and Lee and the entire ISFSI team. That is all I've got. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks for hosting, Brad. Y'all have a good night. See you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad and Chris and Dan.
Uh-huh.
Have a good afternoon.
Very good. My pleasure.